I don't know if you want me to talk about this, but I've been a two-time FISO customer.
Yeah. Talking about that prior experience before VISO, how long would you say on average it took to onboard a new vendor?
It could take weeks, if not months. The challenge with that is you need people to manage that process, which is always daunting. If
Right.
you were going to invest in cybersecurity, is that where you want to put people? And so really that's what sort of drew me to the conclusion, we have to invest in this and we have to automate it.
And I always say, think about what it takes to get a new vendor approved internally, like from the business side. There had to have been ROI or some positive business impact.
If you're in HR or somewhere else, I would be frustrated too. They want a decision within their lifetime. So they don't want to wait 6, 7, 8 weeks for an answer. And so it's a very frustrating and manual process without a tool.
In one sentence, how has improving vendor onboarding changed how your team supports the business?
We're faster and more consistent.
So today, most companies work with hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors, but that comes with real risk. Research shows that nearly 97% of organizations experienced at least one third-party breach last year, and about 30% of all data breaches now involve a vendor. These incidents aren't rare, they're becoming the norm. At the same time, vendor onboarding timelines are often underestimated. Many organizations say onboarding should take weeks, but half report that vendor control assessments take more than 45 days. That delay slows down teams, frustrates internal stakeholders, and consumes limited risk team attention, especially when working with a nimble team. We're here to understand how Jeff Deakins at James Hardie approached this challenge, the vendor onboarding issues he faced, how his process evolved, and the business impact of improving onboarding efficiency.
Awesome.
To talk about your experience with VISO Trust. So let's first jump into what the onboarding vendor TPRM experience was pre-VISO. Were you guys using a manual questionnaire? Kind of take us through that process.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want me to talk about this, but I've been a two-time FISO customer.
You can talk about whatever you want.
So our process initially was a questionnaire. And so when I came in, it was manual. It was a questionnaire along with we would have calls with the whoever the vendor was, and which was very similar at the prior place too, right? So the challenge with that is you need people to manage that process, which is always daunting. If you were going to invest in cybersecurity, is that where you want to put people? And so really that's what sort of drew me to the conclusion, we have to invest in this and we have to automate it because there's no way to sustain it long-term as a manual questionnaire and process.
Okay, so talking about that prior experience before VISO, how long would you say on average it took to onboard a new vendor?
It could take weeks, if not months, right? So the challenge with the old process, so think about, I got to set first, I put a questionnaire together. Maybe that questionnaire has 100 questions. Who knows how many questions? It goes to a salesperson at the organization. Maybe someone eventually responds to you. Who knows if the answers make any sense because it's just they're just filling in answers. And if the salesperson fills it out, it's all positive. We absolutely can do patching. We can do everything.
That's what I was gonna say. I'm like, it really depends on who's filling it out because if I'm filling it out, let's just
security
say
in a nuclear silo is nothing compared to the type of security we have here at ABC vendor with 4 people working here. And so you get these answers maybe at some point, and then you have to make sense of any of the answers. And so you think about that entire process. Well, that could be a 5, 6, 7 week process, depending on how it is, and then you're going the back and forth, and then eventually you make some life decision as to this vendor's okay or it's not okay. But even that, so think about that, it's a little arbitrary. I think it's okay. Like based on the answers,
low assurance.
it seems okay. And I think, and then one challenge with that is the business gets frustrated because they don't understand why we're sending out 100 questionnaire. First of all, if you're in HR or somewhere else, I would be frustrated too. They want a decision within their lifetime, right? So they don't want to wait 6, 7, 8 weeks for an answer. And so it's a very frustrating and manual process without a tool.
And I always say, think about what it takes to get a new vendor approved internally, like from the business side. There had to have been ROI or some positive
It's already
business
the gauntlet.
impact.
You're running through legal,
Right.
procurement. You already have the gauntlet of
Yes.
processes. We just become the extra gauntlet. And usually you're a little tired at that point. And so you don't, to go through now, you got to talk to the cybersecurity people.
Yep.
No one wants to talk to the cybersecurity people. We're not the most popular department. And so to really have to want to go in and go through a 6 or 7, 8 week assessment makes no sense.
Isn't it crazy that that is still the norm for so many organizations out there?
I think it's the norm, but I also think the other challenge with that process is the business moves around you,
Yeah.
right? And so unless there's a consequence internally
Mm.
to doing a cyber review, so if you're in an organization which has a low cyber maturity and there's really no consequence to them going around you, they're just naturally gonna
Mm.
you'll just end up with software with no security
Yeah.
review.
Yeah.
And it depends on the strength of your sort of that vendor onboarding process, whether cyber's embedded in it or whether it gets into process maturity of the organization and where they're at.
Mhm.
But fortunately we don't have that problem, but that I've seen organizations that have had that problem
Yeah.
where it's too long of a process. There's really no consequences to moving,
Yeah.
going through that process. And quite frankly, when I was on the business side, I'm not saying that I wouldn't have maybe done the same thing
Yeah.
if I had to get something done. So understanding both sides of that is really
Mhm.
important.
Yeah, that's very helpful to me when I'm talking to organizations and understanding why their process is the way that it is. So it's a great point. So when you first started evaluating TPRM platform, was there a moment when the rest of the executive team understood why this was important, an important initiative to deal with now? Like, did you have to convince them? How was that process?
No, so I'll talk a little bit about my current role and then
Okay.
also where I was at before. So it's interesting when I was at Marmon, we had a whole bunch of different businesses.
Hmm.
So Marmon is a great business, love Marmon. Uh, but the challenge with Marmon is there's a whole bunch of different types of
Hmm.
businesses. Some are regulated, some are not
Right.
regulated, probably every regulation under the sun in one way, shape, or form, depending on the type of business. Because really it's a whole bunch of different unrelated businesses together. So I think part of that is third party is in a lot of if you're in any type of regulation, whether it's New York DFS, whether you're selling, defense, right, CMMC, you already have a requirement to do third party risk. If you want to be
Hmm.
certified, compliant, most of those frameworks require you to have third party risk. So you
Hmm.
have a compliance requirement and a duty of care requirement in those circumstances to do third party. Right. So that's the first piece in terms of talking to executives is we have this natural need because of compliance, because of duty of care. The second piece is you should just know who you're doing business with.
Right.
And even if you can't predict that someone's going to have a security incident or not, and I don't think that's entirely always the expectation because if I could predict everyone that could have a security incident, I would be a multi-billionaire laying on a beach somewhere. I wouldn't be here with you. So I think really the other secondary piece is we should just know who we're doing businesses.
Hmm.
We should know where our data is. We should know where it's just a very practical view of the
Right.
world.
Yep.
Like if someone has your employee data, you should know
Yeah.
who has your employee data. If
Yep.
someone has your intellectual property, you should know who has your intellectual property. And just that ability to pull a list and
Hmm.
say, who has my data is a huge benefit to an organization. The type
Hmm.
of access they have. Do they have access? Do they have API access to your network? Do they have credentials in your network? Because if they have a breach, so let's get into the breach side. If they have a breach, you're going to want to know, oh, yeah, they got breached and they have access to our network. We probably should shut that off.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times they're in the middle of a breach, so they may not notify you right away.
Right.
So just that knowledge. So the executive teams, I've always found the executive teams very supportive
Hmm.
of third party risk when you explain it to them.
Hmm.
I think in security, we can use overly technical terms
Yeah.
and we can make it overly technical. And I think that's where you end up with executive teams that maybe aren't supportive of
Yeah.
it.
So, when you were evaluating TPRM platforms, did you do some sort of ROI model where you were figuring out kind of the average cost to onboard a new vendor the old way versus, the with something like Viso Trust? Did you do that um with that detailed of a financial
I think
analysis?
I think no,
Hmm.
and I'll tell you why. So if you look at a lot of third party risk programs that don't have a tool,
Hmm.
and you measure two things, whether it's the efficiency of the process,
Hmm.
which is the surveys and all the other
Yep.
things, and then also the effectiveness of
Yep.
the process, right? So do we know all our vendors? Are they all going
Hmm.
through this? Do we know all of the sort of the attributes that I talked about? When you look in a low maturity, they're not efficient and they're not
Hmm.
effective, meaning
Right.
they may have something that looks like a process,
Yeah.
but it's probably super manual. And it's really not producing the outcomes that it's supposed
Right.
to be. So, typically we just said, look, we have low maturity,
Hmm.
right? You look at the efficiency, effectiveness. I'm not going to go hire someone to do this full time. Back
Hmm.
to if I had to make a cybersecurity investment in people, third party risk is not where I would make the
Right.
investment.
Right.
So if you're not going to make the investment in people, the next piece is to make a software investment,
Hmm.
right? And so we looked at platforms where like it has to be mostly automated,
Hmm.
meaning 99% of this process has to be, meaning the platform has to be able to evaluate a SOC 2. It has to be able to evaluate answers from a security or ISO or whatever the method of security questions and
Hmm.
answers that you're going to go with, that platform has to be able to evaluate those answers in some automated way and flag out the exceptions versus
Hmm.
someone manually looking at it. So
Hmm.
we didn't get down the path of, oh, the ROI. A lot of it was a conversation with the executive team. This is what we want to go do.
Hmm.
This is the cost of it. And just more of informing.
Yeah.
Typically, in my roles, I've been fortunate in both organizations to have the leeway to make that
Yeah.
decision without going to the executive team.
Hmm.
So typically, those are more informed.
And you had used Viso previously. So did you come into the new organization knowing that you wanted to implement Viso?
Yeah, so we had at Marmon, I had used it, and just because of the disparate nature of that organization, it's a huge
Yep.
organization. And so we needed a tool,
Yep.
and we had probably looked at a half a dozen tools,
Hmm.
and that one offered the highest level back to automation. And just for where we were at, there were a whole bunch of other things that needed to be addressed,
Hmm.
and so I needed something with high automation, something that I could turn around quickly, something that made the users happy. Because if the other challenge is if the users aren't even used to doing third party
Yeah.
risk, cyber risk, you have to make sure whatever process that is very easy for
Yeah.
them.
That they're actually
And
going to do it.
that's really the other piece is the change management of
Yep.
introducing third party risk. It's okay if you're already doing it, and you're doing surveys, and you're doing that consistently. Users may not like you, but they already sort of
Hmm.
understand that it's a terrible process.
Hmm.
I think the challenge is if you're not doing that, you try and introduce that, you're even going to get even more. So now I'm spending all this money. Now I got to go through this terrible process. So I think in both orgs, we did look at a number of different tools, and largely, like I said, it was both the efficiency and
Yeah.
effectiveness view that we had to drive both of those.
And how has the team adopted it? Has it been a pretty seamless
Yeah,
transition?
it's been easy. I think for us, it's low effort,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the nice thing is out of the box, it's configured,
Hmm.
so it wasn't a huge uplift. I think probably I created some tags in it,
Hmm.
loaded a couple of test vendors in it, and it's a very intuitive platform to
Yeah.
use, and so sort of guides you through it,
Yeah.
and yeah,
So now how many people run your TPRM program within Viso?
nobody.
Yeah.
So we do it part-time. So typically when we get a request, someone will get the information, run it through Viso. It's relatively easy. We
Mhm.
ask some basic questions around the vendor. If it's a startup, we will do some additional research,
Mhm.
or what round of funding they are. Do they actually have a live human as a security person?
Mhm.
And but usually it's a part-time person.
Mhm. Yeah. It's pretty amazing because I talk to a lot of teams that have multiple people doing TPRM. Um, So the fact that we can have one person doing it part-time and more effectively is a
And it
huge win.
depends on the level of regulation. Some industries, look, if you're running a nuclear power plant or you're building missile defense systems, you're going to probably have a full-time
Yep.
DPRM person, and probably rightfully so, because the level of risk that you have is so disproportionate. And the other additional challenge is you just have greater third-party risk, because when you're, especially in a highly regulated or something that a state actor might be after, you're going to put a lot more resources into that particular area for other reasons, right? And so I do think it depends on the level of regulatory, not just
Scrutiny.
regulatory, but then also the level of risk you have. If you're a bank, you're probably going to put a lot more into third-party risk. If you make screws for a living, you manufacture screws, probably low risk of someone stealing your IP, probably low risk of being targeted by a state actor, right? It's going to be a drive-by attack, ransomware attack, and then your third parties are probably not super sophisticated either. So
we work with a lot of banks, financial institutions, insurance companies. So the highly regulated industries love us for that reason. Exactly.
Well, exactly, is because you have so much, back to efficiency and effectiveness of a process, you're driving such a larger amount of volume through that process. You have to be efficient, because you just wouldn't be able to hire enough people. So you talk about, do you have a full-time person? I'm sure some of those institutions have 2 or 3 people.
They do.
And without that platform, they would need 10 or 15 people. So, and are you really going to go get the budget for 10 or 15 when you have a need in identity or incident response or somewhere else? Is that back to the place where you're really going to get the resources?
So now that VISO is implemented, how long does it take to onboard a new vendor?
Just a couple of minutes. So usually if they have a SOC 2 type 2, we'll load it in. Generally it's 5-10 minutes for it to come back. It flags any exceptions. We do some additional due diligence. Like I said, if it's a startup, usually I'll look at what round of funding they're in. I look at LinkedIn to see if there's a live human in security. And then generally we usually will send a note back to the business saying, hey, here's the risk. This is what you should think about. And I'll have that conversation with the business. But usually the turnaround is 10-15 minutes. It's relative.
Okay. So Jeff, quick round here. So in one sentence.
That's hard for me. One sentence. That's a challenge. We'll see. We'll see what the question is.
All right. In one sentence, how has improving vendor onboarding changed how your team supports the business?
We're faster and more consistent.
I love that. I mean, that was like 4 words. Good job.
Well, I tried. I'm like, how do I get that out?
Okay. And what would you tell a peer whose vendor onboarding process is still manual and slow?
Automate it.
Oh, I mean, 2 words in that one. Let's see if we can do 1 word. All right. So after bringing on VISO, what is the thing that surprised you the most? Or is there a moment where you thought to yourself, this is really working?
The first week.
You can say more than just a couple words. I'm
going to have to go with a couple more words. In terms of that we knew it was working, it would be just back to speed, right? The speed and consistency and ease of getting it done. It was night and day compared to what we had in the past.
That really is so much of the crux of it, isn't it? If you had to put a headline on this story, what would it be?
That's a good question. Automate your third party with VISO Trust.
Hey, I'll take that.